We're pleased tonight to have Clare Howard and David Zalaznik with us, the author and photojournalist of the book In the Spirit of Wetlands. I will say that some of you did order the book, and it's fascinating. I was entranced by all that I learned about wetlands, and I knew very little. We also purchased a copy for our library so that if you didn't have a chance to order it, be sure to borrow it from our library too. A little background on both of our people tonight. Clare Howard is a journalist formerly with the Peoria Journal-Star and the Community Word. She has a master's degree in journalism from the University of Illinois and a doctorate from Union Institute and University. She has another book coming out called Wisdom of the Marsh, and at their table at the back of the room, you'll have more information about that. It comes out next spring, and that one is focusing on New York State, where they live at this time. It focuses on the vast wetland complex in central New York. And its mission is exploring the universal role wetlands play in combating climate change and restoring diversity, justice, and community. David Zalaznik is a photojournalist. He currently lives in New York. And his newspaper career began at the Lincoln, Illinois Courier, so another local newspaper. And he ended his career with retirement 3 decades later from the Peoria Journal-Star also. He has a bachelor's degree in journalism and mass communication from the University of Iowa and a master's degree in journalism from the University of Illinois. And during his career, he became or developed a special interest on the coverage of environmental issues, and that's what led them in part to studying the wetlands. Tonight, they will talk about the properties that are mentioned in the book, and what I found particularly interesting is there are 12 different properties, and they're all in driving distance of Bloomington Normal. In fact, on Saturday, we visited the Franklin Farm that's mentioned in the book. And as Ann said, on Saturday, we'll be visiting the Waterfowl Refuge in Hennepin. So without ado, I will leave it to you, Clare and David. So we're wanting to find out more. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting us. And just to follow up on one of Kathy's comments, yes, they're all in central Illinois, and Emiquon, which is south of us, is designated as a Ramsar site. So now is the Sioux and West Dixon Waterfowl Refuge, where some of you will be going on Saturday. And what does that mean? It means an international body came and inspected that landscape, explored the science, looked at what the land used to be, what it has been restored to, and said, this is a wetland of international significance. And at Emiquon, we like to add a story about Mike Miller, an environmentalist from Peoria, who was a chaperone as his daughter went down to Costa Rica. And the children were doing something on a zip line. And Mike was sitting in a coffee shop and chatting with somebody, and he said he was from Central Illinois. And the man said, what? Central Illinois? Where Emiquon is? I am a tour bus driver. How many tour buses do you have of birders coming to see Emiquon? Should I apply for a job there? I've heard so much about it. I'd love to be there. And Mike said, we don't have tour buses going. to Emaquan. It's just 60 miles of Peoria, and people don't go there. People don't know it exists. And here's a sort of silly reason why. Do you remember when some of the ad campaigns said, well, broccoli doesn't have an ad campaign. Nobody advertises for broccoli. Wetlands don't have an ad campaign. Nobody's going to advertise for a swamp, a bog, a marsh, or a wetland. So it's your organization and your interest that will let people know these are resources that can turn the tide on climate change. David will have a few opening comments. I started mine referencing an article from the New York Times that I have on a back table about a young woman in Ukraine, a war-torn country where civilians are attacked during war. And she collects flower seeds. She collects the seeds from her grandmother's garden, from her garden. She packages them at night. And in the article, you'll see, because of all of the blackouts, she often has to package them by candlelight. And she then has international client base for these flowers. And at the end of a beautiful article, the question arises, does a flower matter? Does beauty even matter in a time of war? And the answer is a resounding yes. Do flowers matter? Do wetlands matter? Yes. That's part of our humanity and part of our efforts to save the world from climate change. And I just would conclude my opening remarks by saying there's a lot of beauty we don't see. David and I don't see it. As a photographer, David is more attuned to looking for it, and I'm more attuned to trying to figure out words to describe it. But I said, seeing beauty is a muscle. And if we don't use it, we lose it. And the more we structure our mind and our eye to see beauty, the more we'll see it, and then we start to appreciate it.
And I would say that I started out my career as a photojournalist for newspapers, daily media, and kind of focused primarily on people and their stories and finding the images that tell those stories of that person. Not very much in the way of landscapes was in my repertoire. I didn't do landscapes very much at all. I kind of shied away from it. But as I got to a point where I was working more on environmental programs, environmental projects, then I had to push myself to look at landscapes more than I ever did before. And I just recently we saw a story in the New York Times that mentioned Richard Mishrak. And he is doing a project himself. He's a fairly well-known photographer in our circles, but he's doing a project on cargo ships going past him in, I believe, Ventura, California, on the ocean. And he's just shooting these cargo ships loaded with cargo going by in all kinds of different light, weather, focal lengths with his lenses, different lenses. And it was noted in the New York Times. And the photos looked, I only saw 2 photos, but they looked very interesting. But we had also have a book at our home by Richard Mishrak, where he has photos just looking at the sky. And some of them are very, very beautiful. But it tells me that I have to work harder at making sure that I find the beauty that is in everyday things, because a wetland is something people drive by all the time, very rarely see it, very rarely enjoy it, and are not very often urged to stop and experience it. So my job, I feel now, is to work harder at finding images of these wetlands and bogs and swamps that help us teach that these are beautiful. They are life forces. They're a very important part of the environmental community and the battle against climate change. And we hope that we pull that off. We hope that we help people understand that you can find beauty anywhere. And as long as you find the beauty for something, you will fall in love with it. And if you love it, you will take care of it.
Yes, and David conveniently forgot to mention that every time I said, well, why don't you take a picture of that? Why don't you do that landscape? He would say, I'm a photojournalist. I don't do landscapes. And finally I said, well, David, why don't you just try?
Thank you.
Then he went on nonstop. So we started in the Spirit of Wetlands. We were lucky. That is absolutely all we were. We had several scientists who believed in the mission, and we started writing the book, and we worked on it for a year. When David was working at the paper on Sundays, I had Sundays off and would work on the book. And I called him and said, David, I just realized this is all wrong. We've spent this year working on a book about wetlands, but we can't write it from the perspective of science. As journalists, we ought to write it from the perspective of people and why they love wetlands and why they work on wetlands. So the whole shape of the book changed, and through the people we focused on, they discussed the science, and we could include the science in the book in their words. Now, Pulitzer Prize winning author Toni Morrison said, all water has a perfect memory. It's forever trying to get back to where it was. Every time we try to dam or put in culverts or divert water, it's patient. It's going to wait. It's going to look for the flaws, and it's going to take them with an incredible force. Our best hope, we think, is not spending billions of dollars on dams on the Klamath River. The dams were recently removed from the river, and nature is starting to restore the river. So the people that we feature in our book are all people who almost intuitively knew what Toni Morris was talking about. All of the people we feature have tried to respect water and work with it. Lately, we've seen more than ever the impact of climate change. I said the droughts and the wildfires gripping the American Southwest, extreme heat and wildfires in Europe, and even to remember when the Siberian tundra was burning. These can be wetland issues. One of our scientists in our new book, William Mitch, said all the fires, or many of the fires in Canada, are wetland issues. When wetlands were destroyed, the peat bogs under the ground dried up. Some of these fires are now called zombie fires because they can be extinguished on the surface, and it's the peat under the ground that is burning, and it's almost impossible to extinguish. So they've gotten the nickname of zombie fire. The damage that's done by warming temperatures is not just a few degrees. It creates more drought, more deluge landfalls. We've all experienced that. And the atmosphere is then creating more drought. And we have said it's when water stays on the ground, percolates into the ground, and is tapped out of the ground by native plants, that there's an alchemy that we sort of call magic. In chapter 1, we featured a Native American woman, Alita Lakota, and Michael Wyant, an anthropologist, and they talked about their friendship. One of the things Alita said to me in multiple interviews with her, she's a Lakota Sioux. She said, "I am in the river is in me, the river is me." I was excited when she said it, wrote it down, and right away that was the first thing I saw David when I saw him. It explains a relationship Indigenous Americans had with nature. It wasn't something that could be purchased and sold. There were no fences to say this is mine and that's yours. It was an ecosystem that had to be respected like a grandmother or a grandfather. And the interesting thing in our new book, so 3 years later, we're interviewing a man who is in the Gaia-Kahono tribe nation in New York State, and he said something very similar. There is no me and a tree or me and nature. It is not a kinship, he said. It is me. And he said that may sound metaphorical, but it's not. So it speaks to a concept of not owning nature and the ecology. And that's a picture of Alita in her teepee. And actually, she came from Peoria and spent 2 weeks with us in New York State. So where you're going, or a group of you are going on Saturday, the Sioux and West Dixon Waterfowl Refuge is 3,000 acres. And it was once pumped and drained and made into farmland. It was after World War II specifically, and after World War I in part, that some of the chemical weapons of warfare had no market after the wars ended, and they started being the chemicals started being marketed to farmers. So on this property where you will visit, chemicals were used because it was once a vast wetland area. Chemicals and row crops went in, and the pumps worked 24/7, trying to keep the river out of the water. And when the man who used to work in a steel mill near there was hired as the site superintendent, he turned off the pump, and the water started coming back to the land. And he started seeing the flowers coming back, flowers that can be dormant for 100 years, and somehow their seeds are still vital enough to start growing a new life. And we tease him and say that he changed as much as the land changed. And actually that happened to several of the people we worked with in the Spirit of Wetlands. It wasn't just a transformation of the land, it was a transformation of them. And I think that it happened to us. We started working on wetlands, and suddenly we started loving them more and more and more. And when you love something, you want to protect it. When Kathy invited us to come and speak, we were in New York, up to our wazoo in trying to fix a house we had purchased that was horrible, working on a new book, trying to make friends. All of a sudden, from 1.5 acres, we have 33 acres to take care of. And we immediately, both of us said, yes, Kathy, thank you. We would be honored. I forgot to say the one thing we didn't honor was David forgot to get the car radio fixed. So we're traveling from New York 2 days to get here, 2 days to get back with no radio. So this is where you will visit on Saturday, and it is a demonstration of a controlled wetland, a controlled burn. So some of the native vegetation is burned, and the process gets rid of some of the invasives, and then the native vegetation comes back. So it's a beautiful sight to see, and to realize that we want to protect more and more of it. I think the amount of virgin prairie left in Illinois is single digits now. So anything we can do to try to keep these plants alive and returning. In chapter 3, we focused on the former mayor of Peoria. I think once he had a restaurant in Bloomington Normal called the Firehouse. And Bud bought acreage south of Peoria. It was somewhat near Emiquon. And he spends day and night working on restoring the land. The 400 acres of watershed drained onto his land. And when there was flooding, he said it came through like a freight train, and the erosion it caused was staggering. And by his efforts to let the water go where it wanted to go, not try to channel it into different areas, he has restored a beautiful wetland on the shores of the Illinois River. And he said to us, he was a duck hunter since he was 11 years old. And the migration of ducks up and down the river has exponentially grown. And he said, now I don't enjoy hunting so much, but I really enjoy anticipating the duck migration and watching the waterfowl return to land that used to be theirs. And this was moonrise at his property. We were on the deck of his cabin overlooking the Illinois River, and the moon rose and illuminated the wetland. Chapter 4 focuses on John Ryan. John Ryan is a 4th generation member of an earth-moving company. His company was world famous, his family company, for bulldozing the ground and putting in commercial and residential developments. John was trying to work out getting the permits for one of his developments and then the timing of the construction of the property. And he said it was late at night, he was worried, and an idea came to him called, well, now it's called a wetland mitigation bank. He thought there must be a way to do this that doesn't require so much of a kerfuffle of getting permits. And he developed his idea further. He actually left the family business and focused completely on his idea, which was he would buy an area of land that used to be a wetland and he would restore it. And within that watershed where that restored wetland was, he could then sell credits to someone like the Illinois Department of Transportation that wants to put in a highway right through this property that was a wetland. So Illinois Department of Education was going to destroy a wetland, and John could say, well, I have one in the same watershed, and we can do a comparison of how many acres and gallons of water get diverted from runoff into a wetland system that percolates into the ground. And he developed the concept of wetland mitigation bank credits. He tells an interesting story in the book about he's testifying in Congress about this concept, and he was told somebody wants to meet him. Go into that empty room over there. And John was getting annoyed, and he needed to get back to his job. He came and testified to Congress, and now somebody wants to hold him up. And he waited, and then in walked Al Gore and said, I don't understand how both environmentalists and developers can like you. And John said, let me explain. And he explained wetland mitigation bank credits. Excuse me. This is one of his first mitigations. He spent $600,000 to $700,000 of his own money on this property. And he wasn't sure his idea was going to work because, as you probably all know, you don't plant these seeds and they come right up and they're perfect. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 or 4 years or longer. This was a learning process. Even Audubon was outraged by what had happened on this property. And once people started to see what happened, even Audubon sent a letter and said, the president said, we were wrong. We see what we're doing. And John, who continues in his business today, said that he's told his wife that when he dies, he wants some of his ashes spread on this wetland. Chapter 5 focuses on Gurnee, Illinois, and Mayor Christina Kovarik understands the power of water. She was a banker, so she also understands cost-benefit analysis. Are you going to spend $600,000 to repair erosion, or might you get out of the way and let a wetland take over? She started pursuing a program of buying up properties in Gurnee along the Des Plaines River that flooded every year. And FEMA would be there, and Christina would, as mayor, would stand with people who lost their homes, lost all their belongings, and they were crying, and she would cry with them. And she developed this long-term plan. She would get 75% of the cost from the federal government, which was available for buying up land in a floodplain. Gurnee would match it by 25%. The homeowners would be bought out. Everything was voluntary. If somebody didn't want to sell, they could deal with the floods year after year. But the plan started to show huge results. And one year, the media was in Gurnee waiting for a flood to hit because it was coming. We all knew it. It was in the news. Was it 2007? And the waiting and the waiting and the waiting continued. And somebody said, send up the city manager and figure out, where did the water go? Where is it? It always comes down the Des Plaines River. It always flooded. We know it's there. The guy went up in a helicopter, traced the Des Plaines, and found the water had gone, the overflow had gone into a floodplain. And that night, Christina said on the news that the water was diverted into a floodplain. It never hit Gurnee. And she got a phone call the next day. And somebody said, "Those are my wetlands." And the person was Donald Hay, one of our mentors who had worked on where you're going on Saturday, the Sioux and West Dixon wetland restoration, and he also has one on the Des Plaines River. An interesting thing about his, well, we'll get to chapter 5, sorry. He really shows us that it's not money that's necessary to solve this problem, not money alone. Some money is needed. He goes about this, or he died recently. He went about this as a lifelong scientist. One of his projects is something that he put in on the Des Plaines River. This was called a riffle. It doesn't look like much, but it cost $350,000. But you figure that millions of dollars was being spent on the flooding. This riffle does not just keep the water from flooding. He said in the book, there's information of what this riffle does, and it has restored the clarity of a river that was so muddy, it was a perfect home for invasive carp. The riffle purified the water, and it became, the mud dissipated and went down in sediment, and something called a native bowfish returned. And this native fish loves invasive carp. So by restoring the home for the bowfish and other native fish, he restored a predator for the invasive carp. So we don't really know all that wetlands are going to be able to do for us. In chapter 7, we look at the Nature Conservancy, and David will explain how this is an area south of Banner where the Emaquan Preserve is, a Ramsar International recognized wetland. And we were lucky to see these snow geese.
We found out part of the method when the snow geese and all the migration starts. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is affiliated with the Emaquan and the other wetlands in that area, they put up they send someone up in an airplane and they do aerial mapping. They have a grid map of Emaquan that they use over and over and over again. And they take a picture of that grid from above, then they count how many birds are in that grid, whether it's, so they can get a good idea of how many birds are showing up each year or not showing up. And on that day, it was 250,000 birds in that afternoon. But we were happy to learn that process, how they figured that out, because we had heard numbers, but it just sounded
How do you
fanatical.
count all the birds in that picture?
And when they take off, it's like a sound of a jet engine taking off from an airport. It is so beautifully loud. And it's such a beautiful sight to see. When I was friend of mine was a videographer for a news station in Peoria. I met him probably the first day on the job when I showed up in Peoria. And we became good friends. We were about the same age, and he developed ALS, and he kept it to himself for a long time. He left his job, really began to kind of close himself in. So when he was getting in pretty bad shape, he could still, he could get in a car and go somewhere. And I took him down to Emiquon to see this, and he had never seen it. And he said it was one of the best days of his life. So they are a rewarding bird.
And he died soon after
Yeah,
that.
died shortly after.
It also makes you feel very minuscule
Mm-hmm.
when you see how much life there is out there, and we're just a little piece of it, yet apparently we think we can destroy a lot of it. The Chapter 8 focuses on Doug and Diane Oberhelman, and it's fair to say that Caterpillar tractors have been used to create a lot of developments and bulldozing over wetlands. But Doug and Diane took it as their mission to buy probably the worst property anyone could imagine. It had been a strip mall, and it actually was referred to as hell with the fires put out. All the topsoil was gone. All the vegetation was gone. It was in bad shape. And he started year-long effort to restore this property and make a series of wetland lakes. And he now calls what used to be called Hell with the Fires Put Out, Quail Lakes Wetland Sanctuary. And they enjoy the birds that migrate through there also. And in the book, there is a picture that we got permission, because it's private property, to go out early in winter. And early for me means a little something different than what early for David is, but we probably were up at 4. We were there by 5. It was pitch black, and we started hiking in the general direction where you wanted pictures. And then even when the dawn started to spread light over the environment, there was no sky. There was no land. Everything was pearly gray. And the more we hiked, part of it, maybe you could say, was the delirium of being freezing cold and trying to keep up with him. But sometimes you really sense that concept of blending with the environment, and you feel it in your body. I use this, describing it, without using the name. And somebody said, oh, that's just over the top, that's rubbish. Well, actually, there's a technical name for it, and it's documented in the literature. It's called euteria. It is a secular concept. It's not religious. When you begin to feel the environment actually enter your body. So then I go back to what Alita Lakota said, that she loves the river. She's in the river is in me. She and Stephen Henhock, the Gaia Kahuna man in New York, were describing euteria. And when I told Stephen this concept, off the top of his head, He had the name in the Gaia Kahuna language. They also knew this concept and this feeling. I guess that you visited John Franklin's farm. We loved it. It's an example of how in our region we are contributing to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico and really dead zones throughout the world. John Franklin said that when he was a child, the creek that ran through his land was just a little creek. And as he became an adult, the banks of that were 9 feet deep. When it flooded, it cut into the ground. And the work he has done, created a wetland, helps drain water into his wetland. And actually, a lot of the wetlands designed by the Wetland Initiative sort of zigzag through a water area so that the sediment is removed, the nutrient runoff is removed, the pesticides are removed, and then it continues into Turkey Creek. Oh, and it's a lot cheaper than dealing with dead zones in the ocean. But we enjoyed meeting John, interviewing him. Both of his parents went to Cornell in our region of New York. This chapter 9 also features a farmer. You won't be visiting him. Jim Fulton is a 5th-generation farmer who has taken some of his land out of production. And he has put together a PowerPoint to show in his church why he did this, why he would invite other farmers to come and see. And he can say, this is the amount of corn and soybean yield we will lose every year over the next 10 years. This is the cost of the wetland that we put in, and this is the benefit. Unfortunately, a lot of the economics that we use today does not factor in the cost of mitigating the damage we do. If we had a way to measure the damage we don't do, wetlands would be much more affordable. But as you will know in the work you do here, that every homeowner can have aspects of a wetland on their property. In chapter 10, we try to feature some of what every homeowner can do. Mike Miller talked about native plants. Jim Kleinwalker talked about native plants and rain barrels and keeping water on your property. And he said he measures his success not in terms of how many rain barrels he gives away, but how many municipalities he can convince to change their public policies about development in areas that are prone to flooding. Just we owe an enormous gratitude to the people who gave us the time for this book. Like the moon rising at Bud Greaves's house, that evening, David got home from work and I said, it's going to be a full moon rising. David said, yeah, rainstorm is coming. And I said, maybe we should just call Bud and see if we could sit out there. And he, absolutely, yes. Anything, yes, he would share with us how to promote the story of wetland restoration. And that was where that picture of moonrise over his wetland came from. And we actually saw the shelf, a shelf cloud of the storm approaching, because he has an area on the river where it's 180 degrees north to south, and it was made more beautiful by the approaching storm. So now we have a better solution. We have a more beautiful solution than concrete and steel. And we have enough scientific knowledge to say, well, maybe we were doing the wrong thing before. And we have enough people who are beginning to love wetlands. So maybe this is, thanks really to your effort and to the effort of the people we featured in this book and our new book, maybe we are going to become advocates and become wetlanders. And we would like to see water and mitigation not viewed in terms of dollars, but viewed in terms of beauty. And then some final comments and any questions, if we can answer, we would love to, but we do give our special thanks to you for inviting us.
Yes, thank you so very much.
Why did you decide to use black and white photos?
It's partly his fault. His good friend, photographer Rich Saul, and he talked, and they both like the power of black and white. So I wanted color.
But it also, one of the reasons is there are such a nice variety of types of wetlands. Some have nothing but beautiful flowers, some don't. And I thought it might be beneficial to keep it a monotone. So you don't base your judgment on the beautiful flowers when it's the wetland that's doing a lot of work and should get credit as well.
So he overruled me on this book, but the next book has 50 full color photos printed on glossy paper.
I just have a
Off of Peabody,
Peabody Road
It's-
over near Edwards,
it's west
west,
of, yeah, a
yes, west of here.
strip mining area.
Mhm.
And it was before it was mandated that mined land had to restore the topsoil. That was a wonderful thing when that regulation went into effect. But before, you could remove the topsoil and not restore the land.
How difficult is it to keep the invasive carp out of Emaquan?
Well, right now, the river is not connected to Emaquan. They have the gates. The facility they have built between Emaquan and the river was referred to as the wetland equivalent of the superconductor super collider. And if you go on a tour, you can see that carp will pool in that area around the river, and they want to get into the wetland. And that study center has a system of grates. You have some photos, don't you? I think there's some photos in this book that the grate system keeps the carp out. Can you talk
Yeah,
about that?
they really regulate the movement of the water. They try to regulate it as the seasons would, but they give it that ebb and flow of the depth of the water in the wetland itself by admitting water from the river or letting it go out. But they do it with a very strict grate system that really restricts any movement of the carp from the river to the wetland. It's worth it. If you ever get a chance to get on the Amaquan and do a tour, oh, you have. And have you seen that on that back part? Does that sound about right to you when I was, it's a phenomenal system, a very expensive system.
But it's also all the knowledge and wisdom is being shared. Doug Blodgett, the manager down there, told us that scientists come from around the world to see that system and how the invasive carps are kept out. So the money spent on that has a multiplier effect. It's being shared with anybody interested in trying to use a natural system to solve some of these problems.
Claire and David will have people back here. They did bring some posters of people and they have the article about the Ukrainian lady.
Thank you very much.